Hi, I'm Tom Hendrickson from the DevOps Online Summit, and welcome to our keynote interview with Manuel Pais. Manuel, introduce yourself to the people here at the DevOps Online Summit.
Hi, Tom. First of all, thanks for having me at this event. So I'm one of the co-authors of the book Team Topologies, Organizing Business and Technology Teams for Fast Flow. I kind of become an organizational consultant and trainer. I have a computer science background. So these days I'm focused 100% on team interactions, delivery practices, and accelerating flow in organizations at a large scale. Kind of my past life, if it feels by now, I've been an instructor on continuous delivery on LinkedIn, for example. I was also DevOps lead editor at InfoQ, and I had a number of roles from development, testing, team lead, etc. All of that before the book was published.
Yeah. So you've had a whole lifetime, but even before the book, of work in various aspects of DevOps related topics.
Exactly. I mean, all these different aspects seem to come together, and now the book really brought to life, if you like, the ideas that me and my co-author Matthew Skelton were developing as consultants around DevOps continuous delivery, where we were seeing a lot of issues in terms of how teams interacted or didn't interact or didn't have clarity on how they should behave in terms of what they were providing to the organization and to other teams. And so that's kind of where the book kind of started from those from that period. And then today, fortunately, has been very well received, and a lot of people consider it a kind of a glossary for organizational dynamics and to understand, how should we be looking at teams in order to evolve the organization in the right way.
Yeah, it's funny. I recently got a copy of your book. I didn't talk to you last year, but I would have to say it's packed with a lot of good information. And I think you guys, I like how you kind of present. Like I said, I think it's very dense, but I like how you present it. So I think it's approachable the way you guys have it kind of packaged there. But like you said, I think it really helps organizations. And, I've been working in technology for many years too. And I see where these, I basically want to take this book and give it to a lot of corporate leaders because I think it's important. But to just come back to where we want to start off today, Manuel, your title for your session is How to Minimize Cognitive Load. So kind of give us a summary about what you mean by that.
Yeah, and so it's interesting what you mentioned. Actually, a lot of organizations are trying to get these ideas of team topologies and the vocabulary to spread. And the ones who have done that have said it's been very useful so that they can start meaningful conversations about their challenges with a good vocabulary. One of those concepts is team cognitive load. Of course, there's a lot in the book, and there's a lot that what we've done is kind of bring together in a consistent way. Talking about Conway's law, kind of decoupled teams, talking about team APIs and all that. So one of those aspects is cognitive load, which is nothing new. In the definition from the psychologist John Sweller is the amount of working memory that's being used to perform a task. So we just kind of transported that to the team level, right? Because that's kind of the unit that we want to think about in terms of delivering value, is the team. And so there is a limit. Maybe we can't say exactly what's the number, but there is a limit to what one team can do. And so we actually start the book, and sometimes it's not, for some people, that they kind of jump ahead so into the cognitive load. But you have to understand the point we're trying to make, and what we're saying is that for organizations that want fast flow, which basically means being able to respond quickly to change, whether that's new needs of the customers or responding to problems that they're having, or that we want to avoid that the clients face certain problems by monitoring and finding it and fixing. So if you want that sort of fast flow, we need teams that are, first of all, have end-to-end ownership of a service, and are ideally aligned to business value streams, right? So we call these stream aligned teams. So that's almost, the starting point in team topologies. With that, with those kind of teams comes the problem of team cognitive load, which that definition I gave you is from an individual point of view, from the psychology kind of field. And so when we transport that to software delivery and team cognitive load, we know that a team is going to have a limit on how much they can deal with in terms of both kind of the software they're responsible for, as well as everything that they need to do in the life cycle to support that software. So that means, well, starting with the business domain, understanding what they're trying to achieve, who are their customers, and then going to the more technical aspects of building, testing, deploying, monitoring, and supporting that service. So that's what we call end-to-end ownership. For a team to be able to do that, those kind of streamlined teams, that's going to, if they're doing that by themselves alone, that's going to take up basically all of their cognitive capacity. And that's where you see the teams that are struggling, teams that don't have time to understand well enough their software, or don't have time to invest in improving their deployment practices or monitoring. Many teams don't have enough kind of cognitive space for what is called the germane cognitive load, which is everything around the business area, the problem we're actually trying to solve for our customers. So that's not a very good point. Those teams won't be able to respond effectively to customer needs if they don't understand who the customers are, what problems they're facing. And so we want to sort of save more cognitive load of the teams to address the business aspects. And so we want to offload a lot of the cognitive load that is around the life cycle of the software, that is around all the skills that the team is expected to have. And so that's where a lot of we can do a lot of different things. But again, I wanted to highlight that the starting point are the stream-aligned teams. And the last year with the pandemic couldn't be more obvious how important it is to be able to react and adapt quickly. And so those stream-aligned teams are going to be sort of the vehicle to respond quickly to change. So that's why we need them. But then we come into the challenge of cognitive load and how to address that.
So how does this cognitive load affect the team? What do you see when you're talking to an organization? What are some telltale signs maybe that they're hit their limit or they're having issues with it?
So it's interesting. Most of the teams that I've talked to feel like they have too much cognitive load. So that's definitely a problem. And they feel like now they have a term to address it and explain what's happening. So, and then the way that it manifests is, from the team psychology point of view, if you like, the morale might be low on the team because they feel, if we go into the kind of three intrinsic motivators that Daniel Pink talks about in his book Drive, which I think have become quite, a lot of people have become familiarized with that. Mm-hmm. Kind of what motivates people is feeling of autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And so if you have a team that's basically struggling to meet kind of the basic, the fundamental things they need to do because there's too much cognitive load, not enough time, then their morale is going to be low. They won't feel like we're able to achieve mastery. We don't have time to invest in improving our skills. We don't have the autonomy to decide. We're just essentially running after our kind of debt that we have accrued. By no fault of the team themselves, just that we weren't thinking as an organization about the cognitive load on these teams. And so there's that aspect of the morale, of motivation being low. And then from a more kind of metrics, if you like, approach, and we know that the accelerate metrics, so the four key metrics that have been described in the accelerate book that are related and correlated to high performing teams. All of those tend to be affected negatively if cognitive load is very high, because it becomes hard to understand the software and all the practices that we need to deal with. And so, quality goes down, the speed of delivery goes down, we have more issues, we have more difficulty to recover from problems as a team.
So then along those lines, as we see it's affecting the team, what are some things that we can do to minimize that impact on the team, Manuel?
Yes, that's interesting, because there's a lot we can do. Like I said, almost if you want to kind of put it in a simple way, the book Team Topology is about why we need streamlined teams, and then how do we address the cognitive load. And so in our live training, and now with our self-paced Team Topologies Academy that's now available, we explore all these different ways in which we are effectively, at the end of the day, tackling high cognitive load, right? So we have we have 4 types of teams. One is stream-aligned that I've talked about, and the other 3 effectively exist with the purpose of reducing cognitive load. So it's not that this team, in many organizations before Team Topologies, they had similar teams. It was not always explicit that the purpose should be to reduce cognitive load, because that can change a lot of the decisions, a lot of behaviors for many teams. So you have some of the ways in which we minimize cognitive load is having enabling teams, which effectively help upskill the streamlined teams. So these are usually experts in some domain that are helping the streamlined teams learn about whatever they have, a gap, or whether that's test automation or UX, user experience, or actual product development approaches, whatever it is that we've identified that some teams need help. We have the idea of having a modern platform as a sort of product, again, because we want the platform teams to be focused on how do we provide a good experience for the developers? How do we make sure that we're reducing their cognitive load and not increasing cognitive load? Because if we have a platform service that is very cumbersome to use or understand, then if we impose that on streamlined teams, we're actually increasing cognitive load. Now we're saying, well, now you have to deal with this service, you have to use it, even though maybe documentation is poor, or the APIs themselves are hard to understand, whatever it may be. So when we think about platform as a product, we're putting the consumers first. Effectively, we're making it very explicit and clear that we have customers, they are internal customers, but that's who we are targeting. So when we make decisions about the platform, we have that in mind. It's not kind of in a vacuum where we say, well, Kubernetes is the right way to go because the whole industry is going. Okay, that gives you a sign that there's probably something useful around this technology, but let's take a step back and think, what do our teams need? How should we approach then this evolution, maybe in technology terms, in a way that's not negatively affecting the cognitive load of our streamlined teams. And other things, and then you start getting into sort of data platforms. Nowadays, you might have heard people talking about data mesh. So that's kind of sort of thinking about providing data in a way that's more user friendly, actually, and more effective than data lakes that at the end of the day are centralizing data, but then it's hard to consume it. And so we're starting to see these ideas of sort of modern platforms expanding. Obviously, we didn't come up with it, but I think the practice in many organizations is showing how valuable they are. And we've seen some examples which go outside technology, even where we see kind of, there's an example, on our website of USwitch, where they have a kind of marketing services in a platform. So it's quite interesting. And then there are other things that we talk about in the book and in our training and the academy, around what should be some well-defined interaction modes between teams, because that's also going to reduce cognitive load. If we know exactly, or if we have a better idea at least of which other teams should we interact with, when, and for what purpose. So that reduces a lot of possible misunderstandings, misaligned expectations between teams, and so on, which is something we also see quite often. And other things, even the team APIs that we talk about are also meant to reduce sort of the communication overload and communication issues by making it very clear how should other teams communicate with us through this team API idea. Very simple things, but are quite important, especially again in this remote working environment we're now, which is how should people communicate with us, for which channels, what are office hours, all these things that are not complicated, but it's important to have that sort of it's really the mindset, if I might use that word, of thinking about consumers, thinking about our other teams that need to interact with us. How do we make that difficult? How do we make that easy? Not more difficult. So I almost feel like everything else in the book is in some way related to minimizing cognitive load. Even Conway's law and microservices architecture, for example, at the end of the day, that's a way that we can break down our systems into smaller pieces that are more independent and fit the cognitive load of a single team, right? Ideally, if we're doing it right.
Yeah. So Manuel, how do we determine, because you've given us a lot here, what approach would be the best? Because there's a lot there.
Yeah, that's why we now have, we're trying to expand our training offering and with the academy so that we can kind of scale and provide help to more people and organizations. But obviously, once you've understood kind of the key ideas, and one of them is the team cognitive load, you can start by acknowledging that it is a problem, because like we were saying earlier, almost I wouldn't say every team, but many teams feel overloaded and they feel like their motivation goes down because they can't properly perform their work, again by no fault of their own. And so just as an organization, or as or part of organization or department or whatever it might be, to acknowledge that this is an issue and that we should be aware of cognitive load on teams, and we should be trying to assess it and address when it's becoming a problem. It's a field which, like I said, it's kind of new in the sense of thinking of cognitive load as for a team. So it's interesting because that psychologist, John Sweller, he has actually published some new work on what he called collaborative cognitive load, which feels very similar to what we call team cognitive load. But that work came after we had written the book,
really?
The first draft. And so there's kind of that academic progress that's happening. And we are also collaborating with people who have both kind of this organizational knowledge and understanding for how companies are organized, as well as a psychology background, so that we can explore a bit more systematic ways to assess cognitive load, or a bit more scientific, if you like, ways. That's definitely one of the things that many people have asked us. But that will come, and it's evolving, but you can get started, and you should get started now, because it's really important to start those conversations with the teams, right? At the end of the day, even if we have a very precise method to calculate cognitive load, if, let's say, we think this team should not be overloaded, but they feel overloaded, so their perception is that there's too much on their plate and they cannot achieve the motivation that we would like. That's more important than any kind of scientific number. So we actually have a template it's essentially a form So if people go to github.com/team topologies, we have a number of repositories and techniques that people can use. One of them is an example of a cognitive load assessment. The difficulty a bit in terms of providing a sort of a standard assessment is that while there are some things that are common to many teams in software delivery, right? What is the experience of building, testing, deploying, etc. We know that those are all common in the life cycle of software. But there's a lot which is specific to the organization, specific to the industry they're working on, and to the business domain. Because again, we want streamline teams in particular to have the necessary germane cognitive load, understanding the customers, understanding the business domain, and sometimes even regulations. For example, if a team is working in or a company is working with healthcare services or financial services, we know there are important regulations around that they have to comply with. So we want the teams to be able to focus on that. And so we want to try to understand what else is taking up their capacity so we can then deal with that. If it's because they don't have some skills, can we upskill them? And what's the best way to do that? Maybe it's enabling teams, maybe it's more classical training, depends what is exactly the problem. In some cases, maybe we need new services in the platform so that the team doesn't have to think and maintain some tooling, for example, for CI/CD or for monitoring or whatever it might be. So again, going back to your point, you need to start to acknowledge and start assessing in whatever way makes sense. We either with adapting this sort of form assessment to your specific business and teams, or just get those conversations started, and then you can start to see what should you do first to address that cognitive load.
Manuel, thanks for coming on today. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Tom.
On behalf of Manuel Pais, I am Tom Hendrickson for the DevOps Online Summit.